This is At an Inn by Thomas Hardy. He is one of the Victorian era poets, but he crosses the Victorian era into the secular era. So he went from 1840 to 1928. So he's born in the time of Victoria and he lives through Victoria and Edward to George. So he has a more secular approach towards the end of his life. He was born to a stonemason. His mum had been married less than 6 months when he was born, which might suggest they had to get married. We are talking about Victorian values after all. At age 16, he watched the hanging of a woman called Martha Brown for the murder of her husband. It's possible that this execution was the model for his death of Tess in the novel Tess of the D'Urbervilles. In addition to that, his poems were his later works. He's more well known to most for his novels, novels such as The Mayor of Casterbridge, Far from the Madding Crowd, Jude the Obscure. His last novel he wrote in 1897 and was called The Well-Beloved. At an Inn is a simple poem and appears to be about the covert meeting of a couple who are in love but possibly ought not to be, bearing in mind Victorian values. So a bit of background on Hardy's love life. He was married first to Emma Gifford, who he met in 1870, and he marries her, and in fact they remain married until her death in 1912. So a good long marriage, but possibly he wasn't a natural monogamist. That's not to say he had any affairs while Emma was alive, but he was attracted to other women, I think, and that's all we can say. In 1905, he met his second wife, so the dates are significant there, Florence Dugdale, who was 39 years his junior. He married her 2 years after Emma died in 1914 and remained married to her until 1928. However, the poem At an Inn is published well before he met Florence Dugdale. It's published in 1898 in his first collection of poems, and it may have referred to another Florence, Florence Henniker, in whom he had an interest. So, as you know, when I approach a poem, in order to offset exam panic, particularly if it's an unseen poem, this wouldn't necessarily be the case, but some people have to do unseen poems, it's best just to ease yourself into a poem with a bit of a strategy. So my strategy works with rhyme scheme, form and metre. Those are the basic elements of a poem, and if you look at a poem and can't think of anything else to say, think, what's its rhyme scheme? How's that going to work? What's its form? What's its metre? So first of all, rhyme scheme for At an Inn. Rhyme scheme is annotated A, B, C, D, so A, B here. So in fact it is A, B, A, B, maybe A, C, were and cur could work, D, E, D, E. So it's there. If we have a look at the next stanza, see whether or not that carries on. So it's G, H, G, H, I, J. So it is a formal rhyme scheme with rhyming pairs, maybe the odd forced rhyme. So that takes us on to the form of the piece, and the form means, in a sense, the shape of it, and that works with the number of lines in a stanza. So all you do is count the number of lines, and in this case it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, which makes it an octet. It's 8 lines to a stanza. So meter, that's the beats in a line. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4. So iambic, trimeter, which is 6 and 3, so 6 syllables and 3 feet, 3 pairs. But it seems to move sometimes to dimeter, which is 4 and 2. So not that formal. Iambic is one unstressed followed by one stressed, although it's not always easy to read it as you would want to. So then you start looking at the poem and having a think about what the poem actually says. So when we as strangers sought their catering care. So just in the first couple of lines, you've got word pairing and sibilance. Strangers sought. Okay, and then a little bit of alliteration and word pairing, catering care, and some assonance in the sound. So you've clearly got some aspects of poetry in the piece, but then you've got to try and work out what the meaning is. Done quite a lot on the structure, on the strategy, the rhyme scheme, the form, the meter. Got a bit of alliteration and assonance to talk about, and sibilance. So we're hitting lots of technical elements, but we do need to work out what it's about. Veiled smiles is your clue. It's a couple who are having illicit meetings. Okay, are spotted by those who serve them in the pub. So it's a couple who are going into a pub or an inn. They are having to meet on neutral ground. They're having to have a drink together, and that's all they can have. But the veiled smiles bespoke their thought of what they are. It's kind of obvious that they're not quite... well, if it were Florence Dugdale and Thomas Hardy, one would think they were father and daughter. But there is a sense of them being these illicit lovers. Veiled smiles bespoke their thought of what they were. And possibly the people serving them, a little bit uncertain, because a respectable institution should not host people who are not behaving. But there is a sense in which they warmed as they opined us more than friends. That in fact, the publican and the people who serve them, like the couple, become more friendly. They're behaving respectably. They can see there's an affection. Maybe there's a slight titillation at the idea that they might be having an affair, but at least it's not taking place under their roof, so they don't need to worry about it. Another technical term, that little dash there to help the meter, is called caesura. That is the technical term for it. It just means a pause. Not always easy to spell, but you can get there in the end. So now we get the idea that there is a couple meeting in a pub on a regular basis. The publicans kind of know what's going on but don't say anything. And they are resigned, if not enthused by that. So they warmed as they opined us more than friends, that we had all resigned for love's dear ends. So there is a sense in which the publicans are quite enthused by them, and because perhaps they had resigned everything else, all that they could have, just in order to meet. So second stanza starts again with a word pairing, swift sympathy, a little bit of sibilance there, kind of similar to the first stanza. So there is a structure and a repetition going on in the poem. And that's with sympathy, with living love, which quicks the word. So nice sibilance, pre-modifying present participle as well, if you want to include that. And that's with sympathy, with living love, which quicks the word, caesura again. Maybe the spheres above made them our ministers, moved them to say, "Ah, oh God, that bliss like theirs would flush our day." Actually, "Ah, oh God, that bliss like theirs would flush our day." So the spheres above, the stars are often considered the guiding mythology of lovers. Star-crossed lovers is a phrase which I think comes from Romeo and Juliet. They are the star-crossed lovers of that play. And that suggests that there's a kind of astrological element in the ruling of the stars and the planets over love. And I say astrological, not astronomical. Astrology is the mythology, astronomy is the science. But this is poetry, so he's romanticising what they're doing. The spheres above made them our ministers, a bit more alliteration, moved them to say, oh God, that bliss like theirs would flush our day. So there's a sort of envy element here. If only we could feel that kind of love. And they use the semantic field of sex. The onlookers are looking at these lovers, and a word like bliss and flush, that first flush of love, that flush of the cheeks, all of that is hinting at sex. And there's a sense of envy or jealousy, if kind jealousy, wishing that they too had the courage perhaps to indulge in such a love affair. So then we move on to the next stanza, which is slightly different from the first two in its structure in terms of word pairing, and we were left alone as love's own pair. So the publicans, the pub, just let them be, and they represent that love. Yet never the love light shone. Yet never the love light shone. This is a compound adjective, which means while they met, they couldn't really express their love. If this is Florence Henniker, then he's meeting with her while his wife is still alive. There is some evidence from his wife's diaries, from Emma Gifford's diaries, that she was kind of aware that he was wandering in mind, if not in body. And if you want to reference another poem from the list in the Victorian era, I Look Into My Glass discusses the onset of old age in comparison to the presence of libido, nothing, the presence of lust. Anyway, yet never love light shone between us there, but that which chilled the breath of afternoon, cold afternoon in the pub, couldn't really do anything else, and palsied unto death the pain fly's tune. So we've got alliteration there, palsied and pain fly. We've got a compound noun there as well. It's kind of a blue bottle buzzing at the window, and flies usually are hints of death. They are associated with death. So then we carry on to something a bit more physical. The kiss their zeal foretold. So maybe a hint that maybe one day this love will be consummated. They will get the chance to carry on with the affair. But it is just a simple, gentle kiss with the hope of love in it. And now deemed come, came not within his hold, love lingered numb. So there is a sense that love is not consummated, that just holding hands or one kiss cannot do it. Love lingered numb. So alliteration there, and a kind of hopeless sense that love sort of hangs around, but he can kind of see that it's not going to happen. So what do? They just stand there or sit there numbly having a glass of wine or a beer and talking, but not able to act on it. Then he gets into his rhetorical questions using the semantic field of sex again. Why cast ye on our port a bloom? That sense of the sexual flush again. Not ours. The rhetorical question is now asking of a he, Cupid, God, the stars. Why give us this love if we can't act on it? Why does it have to be like this? Which is similar to I look into my glass, why give me old age and not take away desire? Why shaped us for his sport in after hours, kind of suggesting there's a malicious entity that has basically said, okay, I'm just going to amuse myself by making people love each other who can't actually consummate their love. So why does love provoke them but give them no opportunity to consummate or express it? So finally, as we seemed we were not that day afar. Don't forget enjambment, that's another technical term. As we seemed we were not that day afar. There you follow the punctuation. They seemed to be lovers, but now they can't actually be that. So as we seemed, we were not that day afar. So the publicans perhaps assumed they were lovers, but they can't be that. And now we seem not what we aching are. So he parallels that and transfers that. They must keep up appearances, even though they ache to be different. We have to. So as we seemed, we were not. We seemed to be friends, but we were not. We were potentially lovers, and now we seem not what we aching are. And that says the same thing in a slightly different, in a different way. Couple of non-verbal fillers here to add to the intensity of the piece. O severing sea and land, O laws of men. So there's a sense of distance there, whether or not that means they have to live apart from one another. And of course laws of men, Victorian values. We can't have lots of lovers, we can't have affairs because it's not respectable. And it does really damage reputations in the Victorian time, particularly the reputation of the woman. So it can't be taken lightly. Ere, nice little archaic preposition there. Ere death once let us stand. So before death, just once could we declare our love for each other. Before death can we stand together. It's not much to ask, is it? He's kind of wishing for the death of his wife, but let's not dwell on that. He did stand by her, I think. He just had other desires. So ere death once let us stand as we stood then. So exclamatory, please let us be a couple, just for a minute, just for a second in this world. So yes, I've mentioned at the beginning that Thomas Hardy spans from the Victorian era to the 20th century, and in his discussion of war then he's quite secular and protests war and violence. And in this poem perhaps he's rebelling more against the Victorian way of life, the way of thinking regarding morality and sexual morality. So he has a much more 20th century approach, and I think that's partly why he's included, because he offers that bridge from Victorianism, if that's a word, to modernism.